Hello, hello. It's Chris here with the 12th Man Show. The World Cup is over, but that's not going to stop us from making a ranking of all 48 teams in the tournament and how well they performed. Now, what is the formula that we're going to use? There's no numbers that are being input into this formula, but it's a formula for my head. And it's what I'm going to use to justify these rankings from 48, so the worst, to the best, number one. And the formula is that results are more important than match performance. However, match performance does count for something. And both of these are factored by relative ability. So the difference between strengths of clubs, sorry, not clubs, national teams playing against each other. Okay, so by the token, there's not going to be actually many national teams that are going to have a very bad grade, an F, and not many that are going to have a very good grade, an A. In fact, there's only going to be one national team that gets an F. And who do you think that is? Yes, it's Uruguay. Uruguay had a disastrous campaign. The fact that they couldn't get out of the group stages, even though eight third place teams get through, the fact that they couldn't get out of their group with Cape Verde, Saudi Arabia, Spain was expected to be the best in that group, but Uruguay definitely thought that they could have been second or at least third. And the fact that they couldn't beat Cape Verde and Saudi Arabia uh, was really a disaster. They had a poor showing in this World Cup, and there's a lot of drama even before the World Cup started regarding Uruguay, their exclusion of Suarez, etc. A very poor World Cup and one to forget for the Uruguayans. So there are only F. Now we're going into D, low D. Okay, Tunisia. Tunisia got battered by Sweden, Netherlands, and Japan. A poor showing. They were out of their depth. I mean, a difficult group, and they're definitely the worst team in that group, but they would have expected and hoped to be a bit more competitive. Similar situation with Iraq. But Iraq had a more difficult group, in my opinion. France, Senegal, Norway, definitely more difficult. Um, but they just got clobbered and were out of their depth in that group. Next up, we have Turkey. Turkey's group was itself very evenly matched, all the teams I felt. However, Turkey was regarded as one of the dark horses and generally was thought of as the favorite in that group alongside the United States. The fact that they couldn't beat 10-man Paraguay, um, they didn't play too poorly. They, but they didn't really create many chances or clear-cut chances and couldn't really put the ball in the back of the net. The fact that they beat the United States in an unimportant match that didn't mean anything uh, does count for something, but not too much. And they were the first team to get eliminated. Uh, Panama next. Panama scored 0 goals in this tournament. They didn't concede too many. Um, yeah, they, from what I recall, it was a pretty close game against Ghana, but they were put to bed quite easily by England and Croatia. Uh, 0 wins, 0 goals. Not the best showing, but not too unexpected. Uzbekistan, this was their first World Cup. I think they thought that they could perhaps progress past the group stages because they had a group in which that very much could have happened with Congo, Colombia, and Portugal. They were competitive against Congo, also against Colombia, but got destroyed by Portugal. This, I guess, is a pretty typical expected performance by them. Jordan as well. This was their first World Cup as well. They scored in every game that they were in, but they also lost every game quite comfortably. Yeah, they were really here for the vibes. Qatar, this is their second World Cup. They had an excellent result against Switzerland, drawing to Switzerland in their opening game, but then they got battered by Canada, and no team should get battered 6-0 by Canada. I know they had two red cards in that game, but still, um, I guess this is they can take that draw against Switzerland as a positive, but other than that, it's a uh, pretty expected World Cup campaign for them. Haiti here for the vibes once again. They brought some vibes. They never got embarrassed. I felt in the tournament they were in a really tricky group with Scotland, Morocco, and Brazil. Um, yeah, and they were kind of stubborn against Scotland. Created some chances against Brazil and also against Morocco. I think they can be happy with their performance. Germany can't be happy with their performance. Um, so they battered Curacao, and people thought they were back. This was a formidable team, and everyone does think of Germany as being a strong team. They had a very strong showing in Euro 2024, but then they got very lucky not to lose against Ivory Coast, and they did win that game right at the end. They did demonstrate some resilience there, but I thought they were quite lucky there in that the Ivory Coast team didn't really put them to bed. And then they lost to Ecuador, which they shouldn't have. And obviously, they lost to Paraguay in penalty shootouts in the round of 32. So, a poor showing for Germany. The German national team, the German Football Association, really has to rethink how they're going to proceed in future tournaments. South Korea, underwhelming for them. They definitely thought that they could progress past the group stage, and losing to South Africa in that way made it so it was very difficult for them to progress. They did win a game, but then they lost two of their other games. Yeah, not the best showing for South Korea. They'll be disappointed. Similarly, Czech Republic, they were also in a group with South Korea, Mexico, South Africa. Um, Not the best showing for Czech Republic, but I think that it wasn't really expected that they would get past the group stage. I think they would have hoped to have done that. Their group was very evenly matched, I felt, but they weren't really too competitive in it. I think they drew two games, but not the best campaign for them. Saudi Arabia, they also probably wished to have progressed. The fact that they didn't beat Cape Verde, uh, and Cape Verde can be a tricky team, but Cape Verde performed very, very well against Saudi Arabia, and I think Cape Verde probably should have beaten Saudi Arabia. They got battered by Spain and Uruguay. They drew to Uruguay, which is all right, but they didn't progress past the group stage. Yeah. Curacao, this was their first World Cup. They were here for the vibes. Got battered by Germany, but then held Ecuador to a 0-0 draw. And then they lost to Ivory Coast. I think that they can be mildly happy with their performance considering their ranking. Next up, high D team, I would say D plus. New Zealand. New Zealand had one of the uh, lowest rankings, or we could say highest rankings in the FIFA ranking system, um, and they put up fights in their games. They were brave. They drew to Iran 2-2, which is a huge positive that they can take. They were mildly competitive against Egypt, and against Belgium, it was clear that they didn't have the quality to beat Belgium, but still they put up a fight, and I think New Zealanders can be proud of their team. All right, next up we have C's. So we're entering in the C category. So for low Cs, we have Scotland. So the Scottish were definitely quite hyped and hoping that they could make a real dent in this tournament, maybe make it to the round of 16, but they didn't progress past the group stage. They were in a tricky group um, with Morocco, Brazil, and Haiti. However, they really should have milked Haiti for goals in that group. The fact that they only beat Haiti 1-0 must be a disappointment for them. And they kind of fell apart against Brazil and Morocco when they played against them. They seemed a little bit lost. So, not a very good campaign for Scotland. I do think that they have some quality in their team, and they definitely, based on that quality, they could progress. They could have probably progressed to the round of 32. That's what they probably wanted, but didn't do that. So, underwhelming campaign. Iran, they drew all their games. They showed some dedication, and even with the political discussion and environment that surrounded the team, it did make it hard for the team to perform well, it seemed. But to draw to New Zealand is not a good result. Yet they did draw to Egypt and Belgium, and they showed some heart. So Iranians can be, I guess, disappointed in the campaign, but at the same time, they can be kind of proud that their team showed some fight. Brazilians are unanimously disappointed with this campaign. I think this one is worse, definitely worse than previous years. It's worse than when they got knocked out to Croatia. It's worse than when they got knocked out to down to Belgium a few years ago. Um, they were all right in the group stage. They weren't too impressive against Morocco, but they started to show something against Haiti and Scotland. They started to show their talent, but it's really just a case of the Brazilians were just much more talented and they have much more quality players. It's expected that they would batter Haiti and Scotland. But against Japan, I thought they were the better team in the round of 32. They were better than Japan, but they were demonstrating clear problems within their squad, in particular in relation to the midfield. I think their midfield just is overrun and there's not enough quality in that midfield. And to get eliminated by Norway, which was coming, I thought Norway did play better than Brazil in that game. That can't be regarded as anything other than a major disappointment. I also think Ancelotti's squad choice, I think the inclusion of Neymar, it kind of created a bit more drama than quality. He didn't really bring much of a spark to the squad. It would have been much better to include someone like a Joao Pedro. They also needed more legs in the midfield. Maybe someone like Andre Santos, something like that, a bit more energy. They didn't have it. They couldn't really control games. So a poor run for the Brazilians. Next up, Algeria. So it was a decent run for them, kind of expected. They progressed past the group stage with 4 points. Had a really thrilling match against Austria, but then they were put to bed quite easily in the round of 32 by Switzerland. An all right running from them. Yeah. And similar, Austria. They had a pretty similar trajectory to Algeria. They got out of their group, but then they were quite easily dispatched by Spain in the round of 32. Next up, we have Netherlands. Netherlands had a very electrifying group stage, I thought. I thought their match against Japan was really exciting. I thought that Netherlands and Sweden would be a closer game, but they just absolutely battered Sweden, and Tunisia was very, very easy for them to beat. So in the group stage, they were incredibly strong. I thought especially Gakpo and Somerville were very, very strong players then. But it seemed like against Morocco, they just respected the Moroccans a bit too much. And that was always going to be a close game. But they didn't show enough during that game and ended up going out on penalties in which anything can happen. But I did feel like throughout that game, it was clear the Moroccans were much better than the Dutch. So, an underwhelming campaign. It was a tricky match in the round of 32, but still, to go out that early is a disappointment. Ecuador, um, not the best showing for them, but it wasn't a disaster by any means. They did beat Germany, which is very, very, which is a highlight for their team. However, drawing to Curacao, not the best. And they were put away with quite easily by Mexico. Um, they probably are gonna, they probably wish that that was a bit more of a competitive game. They went out in the round of 32, not too unexpected, although many people did think that they were going to be dark horses and were going to progress quite far. Um, so, kind of a mediocre campaign. Next up, Ghana. Ghana had an all right campaign by their standards. Their football is not really at the level that it was years ago. Ghana's um, been known to be titans of African football, and they're kind of in a phase, a very uh, not the best phase in their football. Similarly to Nigeria and Cameroon, there's kind of been a shift in African football, and they did have Kudus, who was injured, so their squad seemed a little bit light, um, but they were lucky. They were unlucky not to beat actually the British, the English. I thought that they definitely deserved a penalty. I don't understand how VAR didn't check Konza's crazy tackle. And Pickford, I think, also was lucky to remain on the pitch during that game. So they were unlucky not to beat England. Still, to draw to England, that result is a good result for them. And they beat Panama, which is great for them. But then they progressed past the group stage to the knockout phase. I think they can be quite happy with that. But then they got eliminated um, by who was it? Was it trying to remember by Colombia, I believe. Um, I guess this is a mildly successful campaign for Ghana. Australia, this was kind of a pretty typical expected campaign. They had a competitive group in that many people were quite similarly ranked in that group, and they progressed out of that group, but ultimately got knocked out in penalties by Egypt. Um, they can be happy with a decent campaign. Sweden as well. They absolutely battered Tunisia, but then they got destroyed. They knew how that, they understood how it feels to be destroyed by Netherlands and then later France in the round of 32. And you can't fault them for losing 3-0 to France. It's just how it is. So, average campaign for Sweden. Croatia, they had a lot of tricky games. Um, yeah, to lose in that manner in the round of 32 to Portugal, you can't fault them too much. They showed a lot of heart in that game, and it was a very close game. So I would say Croatia had uh, a tough draw, a tough road, but they had a slightly underwhelming campaign. Portugal, Portugal had a very poor group stage. Didn't perform well against Congo, didn't perform well against Colombia, and performed well against newcomers Uzbekistan, which is should be completely the case. It's to beat Uzbekistan is not a big achievement, but the fact that they performed quite poorly against Congo, didn't get 3 points against them, and they were very lucky not to lose against Colombia. It made their path in the knockout stage is much more difficult. Now, they did beat Croatia in a hard fought game. However, they lost to Spain, which they can't be slagged for that. Yet, one cannot help but feel that their mediocre group stage performance really led them to a more difficult path in the knockouts. So, a disappointing campaign for Portugal. Senegal next in 21. Senegal, I thought Senegal were incredibly competitive in all of their games, even if they didn't win many of them. They only won one game in this World Cup. That was against Iraq. They battered them 5-0. But against France, they were competitive. They were dangerous, even though they lost that game. And against Norway, it was also a very close game that they lost. Um, and similar case in their round of 32 game against Belgium, in which it just slipped away from them right at the end, in which the Belgians just came back right at the end. So they'll be disappointed with how, especially that Belgium game, turned out. Yet I do feel like in these matches, they did actually perform for the most part quite well. And they had a lot of very difficult matches early on. Uh, 20, I'd say Bosnia Herzegovina. They progressed out of the group stages to round of 32 match. I think they can be happy with that. Their World Cup campaign ultimately ended against the United States. Um, yeah, it was all right for them, but they can be happy with it. And next up in number 19, so a high C, C plus, I would say, is Japan. There's a lot of hype around the team beforehand. However, they did have a lot of injuries. A great game against Netherlands. They performed well against Tunisia and Sweden as well. They were competitive against Brazil. However, Brazil had a lot more class than them. And then they lost to the Brazilians. A bit unlucky with the draw. I thought they had a difficult draw, also a pretty tricky group, but they played quite well. And I think they can be mildly happy with their performance, although not as far, not their progression. They didn't progress too far. All right, next up, B ratings. All right, next up, teams with a B rating. For me, low B rating, Ivory Coast. They played quite well in this World Cup. Um, beat Curacao, beat Ecuador, and they just barely couldn't hold on to a win against Germany. They probably should have won that game. And then they were competitive in the round of 32 against Norway. However, they did lose that game. So I think they had quite good performances in this World Cup, but they didn't progress perhaps as far as they would have liked. Yet, I can't say too many people expected them to go too far. So they had a mildly successful World Cup, I would say. Next up, the United States. They started very, very hot. Excellent performance against Paraguay, good win against Australia, and then they lost to Turkey, but it was an unimportant game. They showed a lot of resilience against Bosnia Herzegovina. However, they got absolutely clobbered by Belgium, and that was what they were really looking for. Is they were looking for a high quality European scalp, a win against Europeans, a strong European opposition, and when they were faced with it, they couldn't really do it. Now, there might be some discussion as to whether the Balogun incident, what that did, anything to that. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but otherwise, I think this is a pretty average U.S. campaign this World Cup. South Africa, I think South Africa had a slightly successful campaign, but for their standards, they progressed out of the group stage after a pretty poor opening match where they lost to Mexico, but they did progress out of their group. And then in the round of 32, they played against Canada. It was a pretty poor round of 32 game. But for South Africa to make it to the round of 32, it's a success for them. And I think that this was a successful campaign. Um, DR Congo, I think, similarly had a successful campaign. They were very good against Portugal, competitive against Colombia, and very good against Uzbekistan as well. And they were posing England a lot of problems in the round of 32. Ultimately, it was clear they were uh, the lesser team to England, but they did show England quite a they did give them quite a scare. So I'd say this was a successful campaign for Dr. Congo. Uh, Next up, Colombia. They had an all right campaign for their standards. Um, yeah, I would say they they definitely missed their chances against Switzerland, and they probably should have won that game. I think they were largely the better team, but the Swiss defended quite well and played well. They didn't take their chances. They were very strong in their group. And to make it to the round of 16, it's an okay performance for them. This is an all right World Cup. Similarly, Mexico progressed out of their group quite easily, um, dispatched with Ecuador quite well, and they had a competitive game against England. However, they definitely should have created more chances towards the end of that game. This was a good campaign for them, I think. Um, yeah, to get out in the round of 16, this is quite typical for Mexico. But that being said, they also did win a knockout game, there being a round of 32, so they can take it. 12, I would say, is Canada. Canada making it to the round of 16 is definitely a feat for them. Um, they haven't been in many World Cups. I don't think they were in any knockout rounds before this World Cup. And yes, they are the hosts and they have a bit of that boost, but to make it to the round of 16, even though they lost quite comfortably to Morocco, I think this was a very successful World Cup for Canada. Uh, 11, I'd say Egypt. Egypt also made it to the round of 16. They were strong in all of their games, very competitive in all their games. Um, and they had a really close fought game against Argentina in which they got eliminated. I do think that they let it slip away at the end themselves. There's discussion in regards to refereeing and all of that, but I think that it was a bit of a slip, we could say, by the Egyptians, but they still did perform very well in that game. And I think in this tournament, they performed quite well, and they can be proud of their performance. Now, number 10, I have France. Uh, Let me know what you think about this placement. Is this too high? Is this too low? After the round sorry, not round, after the third place game, I repositioned a few teams. And for me, France gets in the 10 spot. They were electrifying in the group stage. Um, we all know that Elise, Mbappe, Dembele, they were all, you know, they were all lighting it up, and and they very soon became seen as favorites, as clear favorites. Even before the tournament started, they were considered among the favorites. Um, but to lose quite comfortably to um, Spain, and I think also the third place match, although that doesn't count for that much, most people would say. But for me, I will say this is a third place game. This does count for who is going to be in third place. You are playing for something. You're playing at least for a golden boot. There's prize money for this. And I know players are defeated, but I have to factor in the third place game in some way. Now, it's not as important as a knockout um, round match, but still the third place game does get factored in that. And I think the fact that they lost to England in the third place game in such a chaotic manner, it does kind of sour at least their campaign much more. And I think that's what third place games really, to me, feel like. It's kind of like the aftertaste. Is the aftertaste going to be one of good after you lose, or is it going to continue to be another bad aftertaste? No team wants to lose two in a row. You know, after losing a semifinal, you don't want to lose another one. So France had an all right campaign, but it kind of crumbled towards the end. Um, they were really easily dealt with by Spain, although I do think that that early penalty did kind of help Spain definitely control that game. I thought the way that they dealt with Morocco was impressive. And the Moroccans didn't really show up in that game, um, but they were impressive throughout the tournament. But I have to put them at 10 here just because of how their campaign ended. 9, I'm going to say Belgium. Now, Belgium, they seemed like the kind of like old grandma of European football. Their golden age is coming to an end. It pretty much is at an end. This is the last time we're going to see Lukaku, De Bruyne, very likely also Courtois. So that era is over. However, they did perform quite well in this World Cup, and I don't think it was expected that they would get this far, but they did make it to the quarterfinals, dispatched with the United States quite easily. They were all right against Spain, I thought. Um, yeah, and they showed a real fight to get back at Senegal and to win that game. So I think Belgium had a successful campaign. For them to make it to quarterfinals, I think it was mildly successful, especially considering there's such a transition in the squad that's happening. Number 8, I'm going to say Morocco. Morocco had a great World Cup. They continued uh, excellent performances on international tournaments. In international tournaments, obviously they went out in the quarterfinals. I thought it was with a bit of a whimper against France. They didn't really show anything against France, which is disappointing. But they had an excellent round of 32 win against Netherlands. Very well, they could have lost that game because they went to penalties, but I thought they were the better team, as mentioned, and beat Canada quite easily, got out in the quarterfinals. This was a good campaign for them, although they're going to want to wish they were perhaps a little bit more competitive against France. And now 7 is England. Tell me, is this too low of a rating? A lot of people are might consider this too low of a rating, too generous for England. But for me, England do actually get a 7. Now, let's be clear about this. England are among the favorites. There's a pool of teams that are among the favorites. They're definitely not among the high favorites, but they're among the favorites. I would say the high favorites would be Spain, were Spain and France throughout this World Cup. Um, Now, obviously, they have an amazing squad, England, um, but they're among the favorites, and they're pretty much a top 4 team, I would say. And they are top 4. I think they're ranked 4th, or maybe they're 3rd. I can't remember. So the fact that they got eliminated in the semifinals, um, and then they won the 3rd place match, they're in this tournament. They're the 3rd best team. Now that being said, the way they got eliminated by Argentina, and this Argentinian team isn't really that good. They do have that Messi magic and this sort of collective um, ferocious energy. But the way they did get eliminated, especially those last 30 minutes against Argentina, are definitely it's a bit alarming how they got eliminated. And uh, I think it was an absolute tactical blunder for Tuchel to kind of bring the team a bit too defensive and in a shell at that point in the game. He had to kind of expand the game a little bit more, try to kind of waste time in that way. Um, but yeah, that is definitely the biggest low light. Um, yeah, the biggest low in England's performance was those last 30 minutes against Argentina. However, they did get to the semifinals. Now, that being said, they never really had absolutely excellent performances this World Cup. I actually think the last World Cup in Qatar, they had probably better performances than this World Cup. Um, but they did progress further in this World Cup. Um, A tricky game against Mexico. I didn't think they played amazing in that game, but they held on to this lead with a man down. Um, they showed some grit and determination, definitely against Congo, against Norway. Group stage, they were all right. So it's kind of a mixed bag tournament, but when you look at it objectively, and I think when months will pass and the furore regarding this 30 minutes against Argentina comes to pass, people will say that this was a missed opportunity, definitely. And I agree with that. But if you just think of their, like, this is a third place finish. England has not had a third place finish since what? The last time they had a finish at this level was when they won, I think, the tournament in '66, right? This is this is 60 years ago. Um, 12 World Cups. What was it? 66? Yeah, like tons of World Cups back. Um, so I don't know. I don't think that the English can be too angry with this performance. It The way it ended also in that third place match, and as I said, a lot of people don't give a lot of credence to that, but that third place match does show that they have a bit of a platform now, and they can kind of perform with the best of teams if they really try. It's really a case of bravery with England as a squad, and I think Bellingham is a very brave player. And if other players kind of follow his lead, um, follow his energy, his sort of charisma and personality can be infectious for the squad. There's bright things for England, I think. Paraguay, next up, excellent campaign. Um, they played rough football, but it was good for them. Got out of their group stage after losing quite badly to the United States. Then they beat Germany in a very physical match, and they continued that against France, leading them to a tough match. Very successful campaign for them. Didn't play the best football, but nonetheless, it was successful. Cape Verde next. They drew all their games. They were here for fun. A lot of people loved them. But they did have a round of 32 game against Argentina. Close game, very close game, but they ultimately lost that game. They didn't win any games this tournament, but they um, were competitive in all their games, and they showed a lot of fight. So that's Cape Verde. Next up, four, I'm going to say Switzerland, making it to the quarterfinals. It was a feat for them. It's good, very good. They had a pretty easy path, but still, to make it to the quarterfinals is um, excellent for them. Maybe this is too generous of a ranking, but I think they should be here. Also, I thought they were very competitive, and they were probably the better team against Argentina until that red card. Okay, next A's. Okay, A, I'm going to have to say Argentina in third place. Now, typically, first and second, the winners and the runners up will get one and two, but for here, I'm going to put Argentina as three. To make it to a final, obviously, is a success. You made it this far and continuously seemed to just come back in games where it seemed like they were going to lose. However, throughout the tournament, they looked so beatable. And they did play, other than in the group stage, they kind of played like thuggy football most of the time. Uh, and the reason they're not going to be ranked number two as runners up for me is just how poor that final was. That final was so poor. And they didn't really play the best football. Their performances weren't that good. Obviously, the results were the second best, other than Spain, to make it to the final. But their performances were pretty poor, especially in that final. That was one of the worst finals I've ever seen. Final performances by Argentina. Um, yeah. Okay, two is going to be Norway then. For me, they have the second best performance. Obviously, it's also relative to what was expected of them. Yeah, to make it to the quarterfinals, excellent performance. They beat Brazil. They beat a strong Ivory Coast team, and they were very competitive against England. Excellent performance for Norway. They hadn't been in a World Cup in, I think, 20 years, maybe more than that. But this was an excellent performance for them to get to a quarterfinal. They get number two. And number one, of course, is Spain. They were the best team this tournament. The way they uh, eliminated France was incredibly impressive. I think more impressive than their final against Argentina. Against Argentina, they probably should have gotten more goals. I don't understand why Nico Williams' goal was disallowed. Moreno apparently did a foul on Otamendi, but I thought that was bogus. Spain, the best team. All right, what do you think about these ratings? Uh, do they not make sense? Are they bogus? Which ones are over in different places? Would you change certain things? Let me know. Take care. Thanks for watching The 12th Man.